Hello, this is LindaAnn LoSchiavo. I'm very pleased to be meeting you for Samjoko Magazine. This is one of the poems that was chosen, Death Fortune Cookies, a baker's dozen of dire mouthfuls. Most Scorpios will be murdered. Japan outlawed one-way tickets to Izu Oshima, an island where hundreds jumped into Mount Nahara, but Sicilian volcanoes welcome caldera fanciers 24/7. Wink, wink. Anthony of Egypt, patron saint of cemeteries, yearns to make your acquaintance. Tumbling into a hot vat of chocolate induces heart failure. An accident at Hershey Park will spark international headlines, fulfilling that unspoken quest for worldwide fame. After decades of Ponzi schemes, Bernie Madoff died behind bars, but continues to hex investment bankers, day traders, nose pickers, and Wall Street jaywalkers. You've been warned. A prodigy of future Einstein, Mozart, or Marie Curie desperately needs a kidney transplant. Organ donors get complimentary funerals. Soylent Green fans must act now. Annually in Africa, 100 to 300 fatalities occur due to a hippopotamus stampede. Book a safari. Global average lifespan is 66. Obituary photos will be more flattering prior to your 40th birthday. 9 out of 10 Aquarians will choose defenestration. Edward James called death the distinguished thing. Sophisticated formal attire, tagged for the mortician, will guarantee memorable selfies for all the mourners. La Petite Mort, a euphemism for orgasm, tolls the bell for voluptuaries. Sex-triggered heart attacks can finish off a man, while drunken consensual sex is more likely to kill a woman. Either way, nearly 500 adults will die each year by falling out of bed. Hint, satin sheets and nightgowns are more slippery than nostrils nosing a mirror for birthday cocaine. The mortality rates from celiac disease have risen, and baked goods contain gluten. Overdosing on fortune cookies will be a slow march to the scaffold, but a new statistic for the Guinness Book of World Records. Tip generously. This will be your last meal. Thank you for listening to Death Fortune Cookies, a baker's dozen of dire mouthfuls. Generally speaking, I write poems because I have something to say, but I'm always seeking innovation too. For example, in my poetry critique group, members were writing horror poetry based on fantasy, and I decided to research gory true crimes and write speculative horror poems based on absolutely heart-wrenching facts, because what can be more horrifying than ending a life? Well, the horror poems, I've recently written poems on the double suicide of two Saudi sisters, the texting homicide involving Conrad Roy and Michelle Carter, on unsolved murders in New York City, for example, a Halloween homicide that was on October 31st, 1981. I wrote about a honeymoon homicide in 1799. And also I wrote a long narrative poem about a Catholic school classmate who became a gunman for hire, who died in Broward County Prison in Florida. It's called My Dungeon Ghost. I really knew this fellow. He inspired me to read medieval poetry, and he became an assassin. Well, I have 2 tips. One is to read widely. Poetry Magazine, Rattle, and Verse Daily all post good content, and it's free to read. The second one is to check to see if you have gotten into a rut and change it up. For example, if you write free verse, try composing a sonnet. And also experiment with other forms such as the abecedarian and the golden shovel. Since editors see these types quite seldom, they're much more likely to pay attention to your poetry. I think you should read poems that you never write and try to understand what is it about that visual poem or erasure or experimental work that you never write yourself, but that speaks to you. Why did it get chosen? And try to understand unfamiliar poetry as a way of expanding your own outlook on the poems you write, which presumably are understandable to you. But to parse another person's work, read some of the best journals, the hardest ones to get into, and then try to parse. Was it the metaphor? Was it the language? Was it the pauses? What speaks to you about that poem that possibly spoke to that editor who chose it? I think when you read poems that are unfamiliar to you, you should circle the words that really resonated with you. What phrase stopped you? And then see if there's any continuity in the poem about the metaphor, if it appealed to the five senses. What got you into the poem in a new way for you? For example, if you write narrative poetry, it's the narrative that keeps you going. But a lot of poetry that's published is lyric poetry, creating a mood, connecting with nature. As you read, pretend you're in conversation with that poem. What is the poem saying to you, and what would you say to the poem? I feel that that's a good approach for understanding new work. Yes, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, because of the sly humor and the different characters he brings to life, and Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River Anthology for the same reason. Assuming the voice of another person and making his or her life memorable on the page, that type of literary sleight of hand will always be exemplary. Yes, I just became Poet of the Week for Rick Lupert's Poetry Superhighway. It's my second time being Poet of the Week, different years, and each time it's been a poem about somebody in my family. So this time it's about Grandpa Umberto's fig trees as a metaphor for the difficulty that an immigrant experiences in another country. How do we plant our roots, and how do we tell our children to plant our roots? And that's all part of the poem. And the last time he published one of my poems, it was about my father trying to save my grandfather from leukemia by giving bone marrow transplants and the difficulty the family went through. So that's Poetry Superhighway, Rick Lupert's superb weekly magazine, and he also has a Facebook group for people to join in, and he also gives 1 week, every week there's an open mic to participate. So I definitely recommend people to check out Poetry Superhighway.